You're listening to At the Core with Sarah Friend, in which I have conversations with women in leadership. As the president of a firm, I'm honored to be a leader and have this platform to connect with other women in leadership, to talk with them, hear their stories, and celebrate their unique journeys and impact. Dr. Robin Beavers, Vice President of Community and Social Impact for the Portland Timbers, is a community engagement and outreach specialist dedicated to developing and managing programs that promote the wellness, equity, and inclusion of all people in our society. For over 20 years, she has worked and volunteered within the nonprofit sector, including youth and family services, higher education, mental health, and sports industries. She is passionate about philanthropy and hopes to inspire others to invest time and finances to help all communities thrive. She currently serves as an MBA adjunct professor and has served on many boards, including Sport Oregon, the Black Business Association, and many others. Well, welcome, Dr. Beavers. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you for having me today. I'm so excited to be here and get to see and talk to you again.
I know. I feel like we've seen each other so much in the last couple of months, but
yes.
Do you remember meeting for the first time?
Did we meet at the sports bra or was it our dinner when we actually sat and met?
That was the first time we really got to know each other, was dinner with Sheila Murdy, who is she is the queen of being a connector in Portland, Oregon.
Yes.
So all hail Sheila for bringing women together in this town. She's amazing. But the first time we actually met was the Women of Influence Award Day. So I was
on that
day, and because you were on my list. I had a list of women who I was like, okay, if I could interview them. And I happened to see you were on a panel for Mentor Monday. So before we dive into your current world, I would just love to hear a little bit about how you grew up, what influences you had in your life that led to the Dr. Robin Beavers who's sitting in front of me today.
There's so many influences. I am born and raised in Portland, like you. We are unicorns, as they call us, which is weird.
I know.
But my mom's family, mother and father, moved here in the 40s. My sisters, I'm the youngest. I have 3 older sisters. I grew up mainly in Northeast Portland. They grew up partially in North Portland before we moved to the home after I was born in Northeast Portland. My sisters went to Kennedy School. When it was time for me to go to school, it was closed. So I went to Jefferson High School, grew up, like I said, in Northeast Portland and Fernhill Park neighborhood. Like I always say, Fernhill Park raised me. Mm-hmm. Back in the day where Portland Parks and Rec were in every single park. They had summer programming. It was like...
You remember I forgot what it's called, the keychains?
Oh yeah, the GIMP.
The GIMP.
The GIMP. You could do the plaster of Paris. You could go and paint those. Every park had different teams you could participate on.
I was Normandale Park. I went Parks and Rec. Yeah, Normandale Park. That was my childhood, going to Normandale Park and doing GIMP keychains all summer.
That is it.
I'm just thinking I'm literally in my mind going back in my own childhood because we had such similar experiences with Portland Parks and Rec and just the different sense of community that created because we were together in person and your proximity of your friends was everything, right? And it's so different now because you can connect with people over technology and virtually, right? But when we were young, that community,
you went
to the park or you went to the public pool, right?
Yes.
Grant High School was yes.
No, that is so true. Oh yeah. We had a little wading pool that we all used to play in. We couldn't wait till they didn't turn on the pool all the time.
That only really got knee deep.
Yes.
The concrete one.
Yes, the concrete one. But that was, I had the best childhood. I can't complain about one thing. But then I had my aunt and my cousins, one of my aunts and my cousins, they lived out in the Columbia Villa. I could not wait to go. And I would stay there because there's a bunch of kids. In the summer, we could go sit on the hill and watch the fireworks. I would go there in the summers when I was younger and had no idea that was like low income housing. I mean, it was like going to Disneyland. Me, I couldn't wait. My mom would be like, "Dang, you want to?" Yep, I'm going and I'm staying. And so I would love to go out there. So that was a whole nother community of folks that I hung around growing up that, probably shaped a little bit who I am today. Yeah. And then just kind of the sports world. I'm not too far from where I grew up, but more of the Fabian kind of neighborhood, Concordia. I had friends that lived in that neighborhood that I hung out with, and they played sports. And so then I started hanging around guys all the time. It was just basketball rim out in front of someone's home. And the kids would all from that particular neighborhood would go and they'd play basketball. We'd be at like my cousin's house that lived close to ended up being one of my good friends. And they would always be playing basketball. So then I got into kind of the sports world of things. That, and I was a little cheerleader with my sister for Pop Warner football. I mean, so I've been into sports for as long as I could remember. But that's another kind of sector or group of folks, circle of folks that kind of changed, or not really changed, but kind of shaped who I am. It's probably where my love from sports came from. Mm-hmm. Back then, I've always had a splash of sports here and there. And I played coming up softball. That was probably the first sport that I played. I played Little League. Mm-hmm. First, I was on this, I don't even know if it still exists. There's this old company called Harder Mechanical. And I played for Harder Mechanical. It was a co-ed team. It was baseball. And then softball wasn't even big then. Mm-mm. And then softball came. It was Riverside Little League got softball. So I was on Burgerville. And then I played softball up until high school. I played softball. And then I had did track and field while in middle school and basketball. Always have been a cheerleader throughout my years as well. But I figure if you really love sports, and back then, sports were really for guys, right? Mm-hmm. Couldn't play. But at least I could see the sports up front row as a cheerleader. And I wasn't just I was a cheerleader who knew what cheers to do because I knew what was going on the field or on the court. So that's how I really got into sports, as a cheerleader, and really learned different things. And being around my dad, being the youngest, I would be the one who'd always watch sports with him. And I'd ask questions. And then I'd go hang out with the guys. And this is how, I shouldn't tell my secret, but I'm going to anyway. But I just go and sit and listen. And I hear what all the guys say. Now today, all the men say. And then I just go back and repeat it in a different circle. And then people think I know what I'm talking about. So that works for me. That works for me. But, between all those things and then family, you think about, those are the things that kind of shaped who I am today and all those experiences. There's so many people along the way. I don't like to be categorized into any group or anything. I'm often solo, which is okay with me if that means I don't have to conform to one group or the other.
I love it. Well, tell me more about you being the baby.
Oh my goodness.
Doesn't your family have a nickname for you?
Little Girl.
Yeah.
To this day.
Do they call you Dr. Little Girl now?
Yes. My parents have little mugs that say Dr. Little Girl with my little doctorate graduation photos on there. But
it seems like this thread of community has always been a part of your life, right? And it's a huge part of now your current role, right, with the Timbers. But let's talk a little bit about, you worked for Self Enhancement Inc., SEI. Looks like, out of college or out of high school. Tell me a little bit about the road that led you to the Timbers.
So everybody in my family worked at McDonald's. They worked at the McDonald's on the one by Madison High School, which is now Ida B. Wells.
Oh, yes. I graduated from Madison.
You did? Oh,
yes.
Right. Everybody's first job, because that was before they built the one over by the by Grant.
Yes.
Everybody worked there. My oldest sisters are twins. They both worked there. Then my sister, Raina, who's right behind them, they all worked there. And so then when it came time for me to get a job, I worked there for like maybe 2 months. And I was like, I'm good.
You said little girl's going to create a new path.
I am not. And my mom at the time worked for Kaiser. So she got me an office job at Kaiser. And I pretty much, besides some internships or special job opportunities that I got between high school and college, I worked there all the time. And I made $10 an hour. And you know, back then, that's a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
I learned how to collate, double-sided, make color copies, make books, like everything, because I worked in their office services. Yeah, I had some pretty cool jobs through Kaiser. I learned a lot. But anyway, so when I got to college, I worked in retail for years. So I was kind of into sales, finished my undergrad in business management and communications. So my first job, like any business person, was a business job, a sales job. And I worked for the Empire Company that it doesn't exist anymore, but they did what we now, I like to say, we call it branding, right? But it was basically, they said their tagline was like identity apparel and promotional products. Anyway, so I did that for some time, but then I was coaching cheerleading at Jefferson. And so I just gained an interest in working with youth. And I had worked at SEI in the summer. Like a lot of us came back from college and would work there in the summer. And I did that one summer. And after I did that, I actually went back and changed my major to sociology. Like, I want to work with people. And
because, sorry, SEI was huge in our high schools at the time that we were in high school. I mean, it was kind of like the Parks and Rec in the art, right? It was a part of our growing up. It was a part of our our support system,
right?
As like inner city Portland youth.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And they started off, of course, just doing basketball. And then at that time, probably when we were in high school, they had moved to in-school and after-school programming. So I went from that and I was coaching cheerleading. And then I was like, one of the cheerleaders, they were, probably most of the cheerleaders were in SEI, to your point. This is in the 90s, the late 90s. And they were like, you should come work for us. You should come work with us through SEI. So long story short, I ended up taking a position as a leadership coordinator, actually for a program that my middle sister helped start, or she was one of the first Pamplin leadership, named after Robert Pamplin. And so I took that position. I found that all of my leadership kids were going to college. And then so I was like, oh, well, we need to be the best to help them go to college. So I went to Portland State and enrolled in their master's program. It's called the PACE program, but to get my degree in higher education. So I got that master's degree, created SEI's. It's funny, my comps project to get that master's degree ended up being SEI's post-high program. We had a funder come through, so that program got funded. So it was just a position and it turned out to be a program. So that kind of led to my passion also for higher education and just helping youth and families prepare, not so much for higher education, more so for their careers, but you got to have a path to get to that career. So that's where the higher ed piece really came in. And so stayed at SEI for 13 years before I left and went to Portland State and became one of the assistant directors in admissions there. Because I had worked on the other side, helping youth and families from marginalized backgrounds or communities access college. So now it was reversed. The position at Portland State allowed me to go a little bit broader in helping people get to college and not just, that SEI community, which I loved. And it's funny, I just spoke at a conference. It's called PNACAC, Pacific Northwest Association for College Admissions Counselors. There's a bigger one, NACAC, that's the national one. And they had me tell my story, and it was just kind of coming back. And to see a lot of people that are still doing that work and helping adult, or just helping people in general get through college and get to college and get through college. To see some of the same people that are still there, but some of the things that I implemented, they're still carrying out. I love that, going back to see that. But anyway, from there, Tony at SEI comes back and says, I need you to come do development work. Because while I was there, because Miss, you heard me say all these circles I used to run around with growing up, same thing as an adult. I can't just do one thing. And so while I was at SEI, I dabbled and dabbled a little bit with the board and with our donors. And he wanted someone that knew both the program side and raise money, but that knew the program side. So he brought me back as the development director. So I stayed there for 2 years before I was missing higher ed. So Warner had a position where I could do fundraising at a college. And I was like, okay, this is the best of both worlds. If that wasn't the hardest job I've ever had in my entire life, they didn't have a big enough alumni base to support, let's say, compared to like a U of O or Oregon State or even a PSU. So it was just a really difficult job. In that, someone else that I had met along my way is a gentleman that worked for Concordia and kind of mentored me a little bit, was doing some work with Trillium Family Services. He goes, Robin, I got something for you. Can you come have lunch? I had already made up my mind. I was just going back to higher ed and just going to do student affairs. That's it. He goes, I got this job. It's totally development. And I'm like, dude, I told you I'm not doing development work anymore. Like I quit. I don't want to raise money. Development. I don't want to do it. But it had a unique twist at Trillium in that it was really about philanthropy at its true sense. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't so much, they needed me to raise dollars, but it was more so about just uplifting that true meaning of philanthropy and caring for people. Mm-hmm. You know, philanthropy means like taking care of human beings as opposed to just people that just make it mean that it just means money, like raising money. And it's really not about that. It's about being philanthropic at heart. It just means you care about people. So whether that's you're volunteering your time or you're giving in kind, it's not just so much about dollars. But it was so timely because we know what happened in there's a lot of things that happened in 2020. From the pandemic to all the racial turmoil that was going on to the elections. So to be at the mental health organization was timely for me. You know, they also have a lot of people who've worked there for a long time. Some have retired now, but a lot of old traditions. And with that comes their practices, not intentionally, not necessarily equitable and inclusive for not only the clients, that they are serving, but also the people who work there. So just working through that, they recognize that. So I was doing that, but then this job came, so.
And you had wanted to get into sports.
I've always wanted to get into sports. So I've been doing little things here and there. I've done stuff that I didn't necessarily get paid for. So I would, if friends or people I knew were holding basketball, like camps or clinics, I would host a little discussion for parents on NCAA eligibility requirements. Or for a little while, I was EYBL is Nike's Elite Basketball Youth League. And for like a year or two, I was like the director for that. One of the people that was funding that asked me to come in, step in and do some work. So I got to travel with kids. It's so fun. So I've always had some hand somehow in sports. I just never officially had it like a job. Mm-hmm. And so right before, in between Trillium and the job that I have now, I applied for a job, U of O, athletic director for DEI. I didn't get that job, but right after that, this job came up. But this hire was part of them trying to put things in place to make the workplace better or to make them better. And so I was like, I want that job right there. And so it took a long time, but despite all the stuff that was going on, and they were very transparent during the whole interview, look, we got this going on. I'm like, I know, it's okay. I think I can help you. But I finally got the job, and it was just like, since I've been here, no 2 days are probably the same. When you talk about resilience and people like fighting through the bad, there were some people that left, which, you got to do what you have to do. But the people who just stayed there and fought like, no, this isn't who we are. Mm-hmm. This is who we are. Mm-hmm. And then for the owner to step back and say, you know what, wait a minute. I love this so much that I'm going to step back because I want this to be the best for the city. Like he loves soccer. Yeah. And for him to say, and I'm going to choose this woman, and that woman to run this. Because I don't know if anyone knows, but there's 5 C-level folks. Mm-hmm. Out of those 5, 3 are women, including our CEO, Heather. And so one woman has been there she might be the person who's been there the longest. And she's worked her way up, and that's Ashley Highsmith. And she's our chief operations officer, sharp as can be. I mean, they're all sharp as can be, but I mean, she knows everything. And then Sarah is our chief financial officer, but also chief administrative officer. Also, she hadn't been there that long, and she has a nonprofit background, but her expertise that she brings, I mean, the finances are like that. She's on top of everything. Super smart, but then so is our leader, Heather, who, wasn't general counsel. She was general counsel, and she's the one who led them through all the madness. Mm-hmm. And she still leads us through all the madness. And she's her own person. Like, she makes the decisions. She's calling the shots. And she's really, I think she came on maybe 5 months before I did, but when you talk about she got her feet wet, like she had to jump all the way in. She didn't have a choice. Yeah. And she's really making decisions and that are best for the organization and leading the organization. And there's other folks too. It's not just the women that have been there for a long time, that really care, that are working hard. The split is unfortunate, but I also think it's the best for both teams because it's hard. And there's only a couple of other clubs in the nation that have both men and women's, if owned by the same. It's hard. It's hard to have focus.
So you've been there in October, it'll be 2 years. So talk a little bit about what you learned as a leader. I mean, coming into that environment, it was a whole new team. You were all new together, and you've got this passion and vision for what you want the Timbers organization to be and the culture change that you want to make.
It's funny. I just finished this little McKinsey executive leadership
Congratulations.
program.
I saw that.
And first I was like, you get a doctorate. You're like, man, what else are you going to teach me? But I learned a lot. So one of the things that I learned was this thing about these accidental diminishers, they called them. And there was these different list of things. But one of them, they had you pick a category. I don't remember all the categories, but I remember one of them is that you're always on. And if you're always on, that's the one I identified with. But if you're always on, then sometimes that means that other people aren't, or their voices aren't heard. I challenged the facilitator about, because it was the black, so everybody was black in the McKinsey thing, because it's a black leadership thing. I challenged and I said, many of us are at tables where we're the only one. So if we're standing down, if we're not always on, who's representing those voices at the table if we're not always on, right? So I'm like, that's a good point, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, you asked me about one of the things that I've learned is being around a group of people, most at our leadership table that have been there for a long time. And as we're trying to grow, sometimes I have to sit back and listen because they've been there and don't, put my own maybe past traumas about not having a voice or not being heard. So it's kind of a fine line, but you got to learn the when and how to navigate that. But the thing about the Timbers and what I'm learning is to let some of that trauma go because I haven't always had a voice, but they give me that voice. And they don't just give me the voice, but they listen and they act upon what I say. I mean, I act upon what they say too. So sorry, I don't mean to get emotional, but no place have I ever worked have I been able to do that.
What do you attribute that to, creating that safe space where you feel heard for in such a meaningful way?
I think it's the people. I think I just got blessed with just people who are like, no, this is your thing and you know this. But I think everybody has respect for everyone in that way at that organization. I think part of that comes from just their past experiences with leadership there and maybe not having voices. And maybe that's why this is a total Robinism. I don't know. But they've been super open, and that starts from merit on down. All of them, just like, okay, what do you think about this? And what do you think about this? And it's never passive. But it's not just me. I haven't seen them be passive with other leaders that are at the table, or even those younger, I shouldn't say younger, but leaders that may be on a director level, listening. It's a lot of listening going on.
What I so appreciate about just the importance of feeling seen and truly valued, right? And the leadership lesson to know, to be in that place where you're truly living it, maybe feeling it in a different way for this first time, and say, okay, well, now when we put our own leadership hats on, how do we pay that forward and create that space so that we aren't diminishers accidentally? We read a book here in our leadership team called Multipliers. And the book uses that language a lot. And I read it, and it's one of my favorites around leadership lessons. But I got done with it, and I was like, I am the worst leader on the planet, right? It just was so, because I could see myself acting in ways unintentionally, right? But being this accidental diminisher in so many ways, and really getting language around it so you could see your impact.
Right.
And go, okay, well, I understand why I'm doing that. Could be for a lot of reasons, right? But letting go of that and figuring out, well, how can I act in a different way to create that space for the next?
That's exactly that. I think you have to reflect, and I think reflection is so important. Just as leaders, for us to reflect on what was your journey, like even this right now, having the opportunity to verbalize, but we should be reflecting on what our experiences are and what is that we don't want to see. If you had generations and generations leading a certain way, and then that's who you learned from, whether it was good or bad, you have to sit back and think about those things. Like, what do I want to take from that was good, but what wasn't good? I think about when I first started out in my career, the job that I had right out of undergrad, and I was married and had 2 little kids. And you think about how it was frowned upon if you were late to work. Didn't matter if your kid was sick or if you missed work, and some people lost their jobs over things like that. And so like today, fast forward, how I lead my staff is different.
So in terms of gaining that employee feedback, so how do we learn, right? How do we get that authentic, real feedback from our teams who aren't going to probably come forward with, hey, Sarah, let me point out the 7 things you did terrible today.
No, right,
it's just not what they're going to lead with, right? But I actually really want to know, because that's how we're going to get better. Right. And so one of the questions that stuck with me, and I haven't been good, so you're going to be my accountability team here. I'm going to ask more frequently, how have I been a diminisher lately? Yeah. Because I think that is, the wording of that question is so, it's like, it's not judgment. Right. It's about a behavior. So you can kind of let them off the hook and just say, I'm just asking for examples of behaviors that have diminished others that I may be unaware of. Right?
And sometimes it might have to be a coworker. Or I know a lot of people do 360s, but even those aren't always, if you don't have staff that trust like HR, then that's another issue.
Yeah.
And then, when you have people, especially if they're the minority in the organization or in the business, they may not speak up, because I had that. I had that at Trillium. Even where I work now, sometimes people are like, why are you saying anything? No one's going to do anything. That's probably been in every job that I had. Like, if I say anything, no one's going to do anything. So they choose to say nothing. Mm-hmm. So that's that piece. But you're right. I think it's all about relationships, though. If you build those relationships, it's going to depend on the individual, because they just may not be comfortable with that either. But maybe it's something that goes between their peers, and then they share it. And then as a collective group they share the information.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the way. I don't have an answer, but maybe that's the way that it happens as opposed to one-on-one, or we give them a survey and say, here, fill this out. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's, I know we have department heads meetings, and sometimes some things will come out there, or department heads might share things there. But
I think you're right, though. I think it's creating this multifaceted means of feedback, right? To make sure that we're creating this safe space, and that when somebody is brave enough then to give us the feedback, that we don't react. Yes. Right? We don't, we just sit with it and we say, thank you for the feedback, and then zip it.
You know what? When I was at Trillium, I can't remember who gave me this. Some consultant gave this idea to me, but we had a listening session, and I had the CEO and the president. It was during COVID time, so it was virtual. I turned their mics off. And like, nah, you don't get to ask no questions. You just got to sit there and listen. Just listen. We're going to ask. And we just asked 3 questions. What's worked well since you've been here? What are some challenges? And then is there anything else you want to say? And we just left it simple. So it was guiding them. And sometimes it'll just take that once the door opens. But they couldn't react.
And another thing.
But then they couldn't react. But that's the thing. If you're going to have a listening session, go in there with the intent to listen. Don't ask any questions. And maybe the questions come later. If it's a true listening session, and that's what I learned from this consultant. It was like, no, just sit there and listen. Don't allow them to engage. Just have them just listen.
Well, yeah. And it becomes a means of a defense mechanism.
Yes.
And so, sometimes all you can say is thank you for your feedback.
Absolutely.
Which is really hard, especially when the feedback is correct. When you see the truth in it.
It's hard. And then don't see it just as, and maybe they are just whining, but maybe there's some truth to their whining. And then 2, with you listening and then someone taking notes, have a person in there taking notes. So then as a leadership group, you can go back and think about it. It was just them 2. So those 2 with myself just sat and looked over the notes. But then you can think about it and then we can, you can consider the source also, but do it like after you've had the opportunity to sit and think about it and you didn't respond. And just see, is this person really just whining and they're always whining, or is there some merit in what they're saying, and are we just not listening to their voice?
Okay, let's go back to you're such a lifelong learner.
Yes.
You talked about getting your master's, but what motivated you to then go back and get your doctorate? I mean, I'm thinking like, oh, it's so much work. Like, I can't even imagine going back to get my master's. And so I just want to honor you for all of that hard work and effort, but then also understand like what motivated you to that desire in you to do that.
It took a long time for me to get the degree, because after I got my master's, then I knew I wanted to get my doctorate because I wanted to be as you mentioned, lifelong learner. Let me back up and tell you, since 1976, up until the time I got that doctorate degree, I've been in school probably every year, maybe a few years off as I got a little bit older, but like I have to be in school. I have to be in the classroom. I have to be in a learning situation. So I figured at some point that was going to run out so that I would just be a professor. Always kind of had the intention, I think, to be an adjunct. I was doing higher ed work, but still working at SEI when I got my master's. But I wanted to get like a degree in nonprofit management. In Portland State, the only nonprofit program they had was under public administration. So I did post-baccalaureate after my master's. You got to remember the branches of government. I'm like, nah, I'm going back to higher ed. Going back to higher ed. I'm not doing this. So I switched back to getting my doctorate in higher ed. So I enrolled at Concordia. The desire to always be in the classroom. So even now, like I teach courses at Warner Pacific. I just like sharing knowledge. If I ever retire, that's where I'll be, is in the classroom. So that's kind of why I got the doctorate degree. People always joke, what degree are you working on now? I'm like, I'm done with school now. But education has never just been about that classroom. It's education is all about learning so that you can know how to navigate in society. If you look at the origins or the history of education, that's what it's always been about. But we all have to learn how to live in this society, and we all can learn from each other. So whether it's in the classroom, I used to always talk about when I worked at Portland State and studied higher ed and just about out-of-class experiences and how important those out-of-class experiences are. Learning experiences just as in the classroom. I mean, in the classroom, you learn theory or you learn how to, 1, 2, 1 + 1 is 2 kind of type thing versus outside is like where you get to apply it, And so they're both important. But learning it doesn't have to be a 4-year college or a 2-year community college. It could be training or learning in another area. It could be sitting here together on a podcast and we're learning. Like we should always be learning and always want to learn more. You should never take what someone tells you to heart. You need to go read about it and look it up yourself. I mean, people use Google the wrong way. I Google any and everything somebody tells me, like, let me go see. Like
Have
learning.
You always been that curious? Like,
Yes.
Can you look back when you were growing up and that curiosity was always driving you?
I need to know. Sometimes it's bad. But I just need to know, like literally, I think that's why I can't learn a second language because I can understand, like maybe read it or see words or hear people say things, but me to try to speak it because my mind is already trying to evaluate. Well, why do you say this like this? Or why do you conjugate a verb like this in Spanish? And it's hard. Sometimes I'm just like, and to shut down at night is often hard. Like,
I bet.
I'm like, just turn it off.
So all of that just driven curiosity in you has you all over the city. I mean, you are all over the place making an impact. So you are on the board of Sport Oregon. Tell me a little bit about that. It feels like I see them all over the place now.
I love Sport Oregon. So I originally got on the board of Sport Oregon before I started working for the Timbers. Actually, Jim Etzel was instrumental sort of as a reference for me to get in this job. And I had knew Jim years before from when I worked at SEI. But he wanted to diversify his board. He found that, I don't know if you know how membership works at Sport Oregon, but basically a business or organization, they pay membership dues and then they send, usually it's a corporate leader or, a higher executive that is on the board. So he wanted to diversify his board. So he created these community memberships. Myself, David Lucas, there's a couple of other folks were some of the first beneficiaries of that. And he did a lot with nonprofits, with those working at nonprofits, just to get more diverse perspective on his board. But what Sport Oregon does, and if people don't know, it used to be the Oregon Sport Authority. And Jim came in and did some work and rebranded it as Sport Oregon. But it's sports and tourism. And they do things to not only uplift sports and encourage sports and recreation throughout the state, but they also try to boost tourism to help our economy as well. So it's kind of a combination of things. But it's just a great organization. And I think it's a great example how sports is one of the things, especially in the Portland area, that we can use to uplift our economy. So
I love that you found all of these ways to really spend your precious time doing things that you're passionate about that aligns with also what you've spent your life building. So education, all these board positions, you have to be an educator to be on a board, right? Like that's a part of being an engaged board member. So the Metro Chamber, Sport Oregon, and then to be involved in sports, what you love. It's just such a great example of somebody who's been thoughtful about like driving towards a vision for your life and creating it for yourself. All the while you raised 2 boys and worked full-time the whole time, went to school full-time. Right? So
pretty much the entire time.
Just exhausted thinking about the last 40 years of your life.
Pretty much.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Okay. Well, you talked about curiosity. I interpreted what you were talking about as curiosity, which is one of our core values. And so I always ask in this podcast I want to read you our 5 core values. Yes. And then you tell me how maybe 1 or 2 of these resonate with you. All right. So our core values are play well with others, be curious, be a champion, own it, and have fun and live well.
Oh, wow. All of those. All of those. I mean, I could just talk.
Yes.
I mean, play well with others goes to my notion of there's 2 things in life, like kind of 2 philosophies I live by. One is be grateful, because there's definitely someone that's worse off than you. That's exactly what the gospel song says. So be grateful. But the other is do unto others the way you want them to do unto you. To me, that's what play well with others speaks to. I mean, treat people the way you want to be treated. Like, that's half the problem to me in this world is people just treat people. I mean, some of the things that people do to each other, whether it's physical or, mentally, I'm just like, how could you do that to a person? Mm-hmm. That kind of speaks to the play well with others. The own it, like to me, if you make a mistake or if you do something good, because sometimes some people are passive or a little humble, man, own it. It's okay. You know what? I made a mistake. My bad. Just own it. Own who you are too. Like if you're you and you know yourself, like own it.
I have never heard somebody interpret the own it as like step up and take the space you deserve. Like I love that.
Yeah, own it.
That's
own
good.
It.
Yes.
Own it. Be a champion. That can mean a couple of different things. When you hear champion, most people think of winning, right? But sometimes champion also means like you being the champion of a cause and you taking that cause on and you're leading the way for that cause that you're passionate about. So sometimes that's what being a champion is and not so much just the winning. You're helping others to win.
Yeah.
And then the last one, man, have fun and live well. I mean, life is only what you make it, I guess that goes along with kind of be grateful, a little bit, but and just have fun with life. I mean, I know every day isn't going to be perfect, but there's so many things to be grateful for. There has to be something that you like to do.
Dr. Beavers, thank you so much. This has been such a joy for me, and it's been so fun getting to know you over the last couple of months. And I just really appreciate the impact that you're making for Portland.
Thank you. I'm trying.
You're doing great. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
This episode of At the Core with Sarah Friend was brought to you by The Partners Group. Visit us at thepartnersgroup.com or find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback. At the Core with Sarah Friend is produced by the Partners Group marketing team. Our content writer and editor is Carrie Conroy. Taylor Kapik handles audio engineering and graphics. Kyle Lusk is our podcast administrator, and Alyssa Mueller is in charge of project management and guest outreach. Courtney Atami oversees our podcast production. Find all of our episodes at thepartnersgroup.com, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Advisory services offered through TPG Financial Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor and wholly owned subsidiary of the Partners Group, LLC.